Imagine a world where you see your neighbor one morning and by evening, he's dead. His body covered in pustules the size of eggs, bleeding from his mouth, screaming. By the end of the week, half the street is gone. By the end of the month, your entire city is a graveyard. People stopped burying the dead because there weren't enough living people left to dig holes. Mass graves became streets. Between 1347 and 1353, the Black Death killed somewhere between 75 million and 200 million people. In Europe alone, 1 out of every 3 people was dead. That's not a pandemic, that's civilization hitting pause. I'm not going to tell you the Black Death was the worst thing that ever happened to humanity, though it's definitely in the top 3. What I will tell you is this. We have medieval records, burial documents, population estimates, and archaeological evidence. What we don't have is perfect data. Medieval Europe didn't have census bureaus, so when historians say 75 to 200 million people died, that's an estimate, a really educated one, backed by evidence, but still a range. The truth is probably somewhere in that nightmare.
It's 1347. Ships are fleeing the siege of Kaffa in Crimea, a Genoese trading port. They're carrying spices, silk, and something no one expected. Fleas. Specifically, fleas carrying Yersinia pestis bacteria. The rats below deck are already dying. So are some of the sailors. Within weeks, the ships reach Sicily. The port city of Messina becomes the first European outbreak, then Venice, then everywhere. Europe, at this moment, is crowded, filthy, and has no idea what's about to happen. Cities are packed shoulder to shoulder. Sanitation is non-existent. A sneeze in one district kills people in 3 others. Doctors have no treatments. Priests have no prayers that work. Kings have no armies to fight an enemy they can't see. The first signs are terrifying. Swollen glands the size of apples in your neck, armpits, groin. Then the black pustules, gangrene of the fingers and toes. People with the disease would literally watch their own limbs turn black and die while they were still alive. Blood pours from the nose, mouth, and eyes. The stench is so unbearable that people would wear masks filled with flowers and herbs, breathing through garlic and rose petals just to approach the dying. Within days of first symptoms, most people were dead. Some lasted a week, a few lasted longer. Almost nobody survived once the pustules appeared. It spread through Europe like a wildfire through dry wood. A plague of unprecedented scale.
Let's talk about scale, because numbers lose meaning when they get this large. Between 75 and 200 million people. That's the equivalent of losing a large modern nation, not over centuries, not over generations, but in just 6 years. Europe's population went from approximately 75 million down to around 50 million. That means 1 out of every 3 Europeans was dead. Not sick, dead. In some cities, the death rate was higher. Venice lost 60% of its population. Florence lost entire neighborhoods. In some rural areas, entire villages were abandoned because there was no one left to farm the land. The horror wasn't just the death toll, it was the speed. Someone could get sick at breakfast and be dead by dinner. Families watched all their children die within 24 hours of each other. Parents would abandon sick children in the streets because keeping them meant the whole family would get infected. The social fabric didn't just tear, it evaporated. Here's the part that gets dark. People had no idea what was causing it. Some blamed astrology, a certain alignment of planets had poisoned the air. Some blamed the Jews and massacred entire communities looking for the source of the disease. Some blamed miasma, bad air rising from swamps. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't have microscopes. The disease was invisible and unstoppable, and people descended into panic, superstition, and violence. The church had no answers either. Priests were dying as fast as anyone else.
The plague is God's wrath upon us for our grievous sin.
Some interpreted the plague as God's punishment for sin, so they organized flagellant processions where people would publicly whip themselves seeking forgiveness. It didn't help. It probably made it worse. Crowds gathering to watch people bleed spread the disease further. What made the Black Death different from other pandemics was that medieval people had no defenses, no antibiotics, no understanding of contagion, no quarantine protocols. When someone got sick, the only option was prayer or running away, and running away meant carrying the disease to the next town. The economy collapsed. Trade stopped. Entire industries vanished because there were no workers and no customers. Farms rotted in the fields because no one was alive to harvest them. In some areas, labor became so scarce that surviving workers could demand absurd wages, a form of economic revolution brought by death. Take a moment and think about what that feels like. Imagine burying your entire family. All of them, not over years, but over weeks, then burying your neighbors, then becoming the gravedigger because you're one of the last people alive who can still move. That's not metaphorical despair. That's documented reality for millions of Europeans. But here's what's fascinating. Humanity survived. Not just biologically, the plague eventually burned itself out because the rat population was decimated, but culturally, the survivors rebuilt. They didn't become frozen in trauma. They became the foundation of the Renaissance. The labor shortage created the middle class. Survivors had to reimagine society without the old feudal system, and that reimagining led to the modern world. The Black Death was catastrophic. It was also, in a bizarre way, transformative. The world on the other side of it was fundamentally different from the world before it. So the real question isn't how many people died in the Black Death. The real question is, what does it mean that civilization can lose 1/3 of its population and still recover? We think of pandemics as rare modern problems. COVID-19 kills 1 million and we're traumatized. The 1918 flu kills 50 million, and we call it a disaster. But medieval Europe lost 75 to 200 million or more and came back. They rebuilt cities, they rewrote laws, they created art and literature and philosophy from the rubble. That tells us something about human resilience. It also tells us something terrifying. We're more fragile than we think. A rat-carried bacteria can unravel everything. Civilization is only a few meals away from collapse. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it revealed how thin the line between order and chaos really is. We started with a simple question. What was the Black Death, and what happened to the people who lived through it? We looked at the spread, the symptoms, the collapse of society. We found a pandemic so severe that entire regions were depopulated, and yet somehow the survivors managed to rebuild. Here's what I want to know. If you lived through something like that, what would you do differently? How would you rebuild? What would you prioritize? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If history's darkest moments fascinate and terrify you in equal measure, subscribe. See you then.